Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my basically final speculation ahead of the Reckoning of Roku. Prior to the book actually coming out on July 23rd, I'm not really sure what other stuff we're really going to get. There might be like an interview with Randy Rabai like the week of release or something like that. The Amazon preview, there might be one at some point before release, and I'll cover that, you know, if it comes up and I have the time to do so. But for the most part, we have like the main preview stuff that they usually put out. We have, just in case you don't know what everything that's out for the book, the Screen Rant, basically full chapter 1 of the book. There's about 5 minutes of audio previews. And then Randy Rabai also posted the picture of the back page of the book, which has a little bit of a preview page on it as well. I'll link in the description to all that stuff if you want to see it for yourself. But what we're here to do is basically go through like the descriptions, what we know from the preview material, what we also know from the Avatar Legends RPG material from Roku a few years on from this book, and maybe try and figure out what this book is actually going to reveal to us, what it's really going to be about at its core. So I already did like a lot of this discussion in my live stream when I talked about the text, the preview chapter, but I know people like to just watch the videos and maybe don't check out the live streams. So let's start off with the old description for the book. So they've replaced it with a newer one, so it's I would say it's just more detailed. There's nothing really kind of that different, but they changed, I think, some wording here that doesn't quite make a ton of sense. The old one was a young Avatar Roku who has only just commenced his training at the Southern Air Temple when his erstwhile friend Prince Sosen requests his aid in preventing the Earth Kingdom from claiming a remote Fire Nation island. Despite his inexperience, Avatar Roku slips away with the help of an irritating young airbender named Gatso. As the reluctant companions delve deeper into their wayward mission, they begin to realize that even greater threats lie ahead. Plagued by self-doubt but eager to prove himself, Roku fights for his life and the lives of others while ensuring that the hidden secret of the island doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Searing 5th installment of Chronicles of the Avatar explores the beginning of Roku's journey from privileged Fire Nation noble to powerful but indecisive Avatar whose hesitancy may ultimately pave the way for the 100-year war. So this was the very early description for the book that we had. Erstwhile Friend is a bit of a weird one where that's very much how you would frame that, like historically, but where this book is actually set, that is not a good word to describe the fact that they are still friends in this book where it's set. Similarly, they probably focused, I think, a little bit too much on the idea that this is like 16-year-old Roku, and we're going to like really clearly set the stage for this one thing that happens like much later on in his life. And I think they made the correct decision to switch around the description like a little bit. So we have a quote from the book at the start: "Curse a world that would provide a friend only to snatch him away." With the mystery being like, who says this? Is it Roku or Sosen saying this? Because it technically could apply to either or both of them. Roku never expected to be the Avatar. Even his best friend, Crown Prince Sosen of the Fire Nation, doubts the accuracy of the Fire Sage's announcement. After all, Sosen is the strongest firebender of their generation, while Roku struggles to grasp basic airbending principles even after months of training under Sister Daisha, his airbending master. When Sosen requests the new Avatar's aid in preventing the Earth Kingdom from claiming a remote Fire Nation island, it doesn't surprise Roku that Sister Daisha advises him to decline. Convinced the Earth King's aggressive expansion of territory points to a more insidious agenda, Roku steals away with the help of an irritating young airbender named Gatso. As the reluctant companions delve deeper into their wayward mission, they realize the fog-shrouded island harbors a secret that could lead to catastrophe in the wrong hands. Plagued by self-doubt but eager to confront the dangers ahead, Avatar Roku must learn where to place his trust and what it means to be a spirit of no nation, even if the lesson comes at a great personal cost. So some of that stuff, with the context that we now have from the preview material, I think gives us a better sense for what we're actually doing in the book. So obviously there's a few interesting kind of points here in terms of like the main plot once it gets going, obviously is about a conflict between the Fire Nation and the Earth Kingdom over a remote Fire Nation island. A remote island that has a secret that in the wrong hands could lead to catastrophe. Very broad, vague. It's a very common Avatar story plot point, mystery, secret on an island. We did it in the last books with Yang Chen. In that case, the answer was combustion bending as being a plot point. So what's it going to be this time here? Because it does feel like a lot of the stuff that we maybe have a little bit of a foundation in here is more of, let's just do character work with Roku, with Sosen, and a lot of the characters that we know surround them, and set up just this earlier stage of the Roku era. The actual plot of the book has not really been, I think, properly previewed in the sense that we really have no foundation for what it's actually really about, but we'll get into that. So we'll start with Roku, of course. This is our Avatar. It's Chronicles of the Avatar. Roku, I think, made a lot of sense to be the next Avatar of focus after Kyoshi and Yang Chen. He, despite having, 306, the Avatar and the Fire Lord, had become like the main Avatar that we know about, who probably had the least amount of kind of like depth to his story. Some people will say, well, why does he get the book? Because we got his story there. But keep in mind, they time skipped through him from 16 years old to 70 years old in one 22-minute episode. That wasn't even like full flashback. So they skipped over his training as just he did the training, and focused entirely in on pretty much the kind of end of life conflict with Sosen that happens across like a pretty broad period. So there are giant periods of Roku's life where he was doing other stuff as the Avatar that we don't really know about, in addition to what this book is focusing on, which is like during his training, which lasts from 16 years old to him being 28 years old, which is basically where the RPG material takes place, is at the end of his training. And before the Sosen conflict happens. That's 12 years we don't really know much about beyond he went here, then he went here, then he went here. Here's the name of his earthbending master. Here's his waterbending master. He met Gatso. That was basically all we got for Roku's training. So we are starting this book a few months into Roku's training, and he has made no airbending progress apparently. So in terms of his bending, he is only a firebender. Now, I'd like to see them address what the situation is there, because, like, he is just a noble... Oh, he is a firebender, and obviously he's quite skilled to spar with Sosen, but Sosen is clearly the better bender. Is Roku considered a master firebender? I would actually really like to know that in terms of his training, or is he just, like, decent and actually has had to maybe do some firebending training himself, or they'll address that along the way. I'm assuming they'll just clarify he is a firebending master because he was Fire Nation nobility and did all the training required. That's my guess. But we find a character who is severely lacking in confidence in everything, especially his ability to be a good Avatar. Now, we saw this. If you watch 306, the Avatar and the Fire Lord, you can see in those early scenes before he basically leaves and he has the kind of conversation with Sosen, and you see them interacting before he heads out on his journey. I think you can see a character who isn't the most confident, of course, and that's what we're getting here, just covered in more detail at the start. And we're going to see the transition more heavily in this book from the lacking in confidence 16-year-old Roku into more of a young Avatar who kind of roughly knows what he's doing, I guess. The arc for the book looks to be him accepting that he is not just a Fire National, but as the Avatar, he, at the same time, basically belongs to all four nations, but also to none of them at the same time. He has to be loyal to the world, so every nation, but he can't favor one over the other. Effectively also the idea from going from nobility to he's starting with the air nomad, that's quite a shift from the nation that effectively, focuses quite a bit on nobility to the nation that doesn't really have nobility as such built into its kind of society. So a massive change in the life of Roku, just in terms of like his living arrangements, basically, and we're going to see that. We saw some of that in the preview a little bit, but you would definitely say Roku is not your sort of typical, I think, noble based on what we know. I think he has a good head on his shoulders, and there's just obviously a little bit of growing pains of him, you know, being used to being a noble for all of his life, and how much of a change being the Avatar actually is. In the plot, of course, we have this dispute between the Earth Kingdom and the Fire Nation over a remote fire island, and obviously the idea, I'm guessing here, because the whole idea of his teacher basically being like, you need to remove yourself from kind of thinking of yourself as being a Fire Nation citizen effectively. Because of that, I'm guessing what they're going to go for is he'll walk into the conflict told by Sosen, get involved in this because they're coming after our island, but he'll maybe investigate the issue and find out that actually there's maybe more of a valid dispute here. Potentially the Fire Nation might be wrong in all of this, and if it is the case that the Earth Kingdom is actually correct, he might be put into a situation where he has to go against his home nation, against his best friend, and side with the Earth Kingdom, even though the Earth King of this era is a bit of a known kind of cruel, kind of callous character. Everything might point to the Earth Kingdom being at fault, but they might be correct in this particular situation. And that might be what they refer to in this situation. What it means to be a spirit of no nation, even if the lesson comes at great personal cost. Like, it might affect his relationship with Sosen. It might impact the way he feels or comes across to his own nation as well. That's kind of part of the whole idea here. And yeah, the idea, he has to be fair as the Avatar. The Legends RPG tells us that Roku will go on to become an Avatar known for basically truly embracing the uniqueness of each nation. We know from his training, he lived basically in each nation for 4 years effectively training. And it's not just that he spent his days in a compound. The implication is that he properly lived, kind of in a way became a citizen of that nation during his time there in each of these nations. And because of that, he came out at the end of this really understanding and getting what makes each nation unique, and having a sense for when a conflict comes up between two nations, he gets where each of them are coming from. He's not just the fire avatar who's going to one of the other nations. He's familiar with what's going on. And I'm guessing we're going to see that here as we go through this. He will learn to see some value in the air nomads, I'm guessing here. Maybe some stuff with Earth Kingdom. We'll have to wait and see, of course, especially if we go into book 2 and maybe we time skip a little bit, which is probably one of the interesting things about the Roku novel situation is, yeah, it might be a little bit boring if we just follow up a few months afterwards. If we really want to switch it up, we're going to have to skip ahead a couple of years to his his next kind of training, kind of waterbending training or whatever. That's going to be the kind of interesting thing. Some interesting details from the preview. I think most of this comes from the Screen Rant Chapter 1 preview. Some interesting family details about Roku, because, of course, he comes from nobility, meaning his family was high up. We find out that Roku has brothers. Now, all it mentions is that, I think he's talking about his parents, and then it's mentioned, they made sure their sons, plural, didn't have to do manual labor. So he has a brother or brothers. We also find out his father is super business orientated. I think they call him business obsessed. And this seems to be the direction that Roku is maybe heading in as like a career path. If he wasn't found out to be the Avatar, that it would have been some business related thing, because we see from him coming up with a potential plan to help this town, and other towns that might be in need, that there's a bit of a business brain behind the scenes there, if required, obviously. So that stuff is going to be super interesting to see how much they delve into it. Like, will we get the name of a brother, like the name of his mother and father, delving into like how do they feel about it? And we obviously know that with fire avatars, there's maybe a little bit of an issue with bias towards the Fire Nation. How will they see that? That could be interesting because, you know, with Korra, we obviously got, you know, our first avatar basically where we got to know their parents. But this is going to be our first avatar who actually has siblings. Now, I think they're purposely maybe not going to go into that all that much, but we'll see what the situation is. Another point the preview brought up was that there seems to be something with Roku and water, whether it's a proper just like minor fear or like a major issue that relates to like the sea. They note that like he takes like baths at the spa and stuff like that. So it's not just a general fear of water, but there seems to be an issue of him with open water. Now, it could be as simple as just he's not used to being right next to the sea, or something like that. But they definitely highlight the idea that like Sister Daisha at the end of the preview chapter is like, hey, come into the water, and he doesn't. So like, does he just not know how to swim? Or is there actually a trauma surrounding this? Did he lose someone close to him on the sea or something like that? Is this potentially why in 306, when he says that like waterbending was especially difficult for him, they're going to play up this point as being more than just, well, water and fire are typically the opposites, and for him that ended up being the case. Water was the most difficult one for him, but was it particularly difficult because he had a fear surrounding water? We'll have to wait and see, of course, on that. Also, preview chapter delves a little bit into the idea of kind of Sister Daisha saying that, hey, it's a known struggle for past fire avatars to kind of, you know, create the proper level of distance between themselves and their home nation, and avoid the criticism from other nations that you are biased towards the Fire Nation. We know this quite heavily as a criticism of Zito from the other nations, but the highlight here is obviously they imply that other fire avatars as well, this has always been a struggle. Roku, you would say historically, based on what we know of him, seems to mostly avoid this because the RPG highlights that he's known for like really embracing the uniqueness of each nation and stuff like that. I'm not sure if he does get accused of being biased. Now, maybe the criticism here is more that like he avoids this by maybe creating too much of a distance between himself and his home nation, and that maybe causes a bit of a rift between him and a lot of like maybe his family and Sosen at the Fire Nation. But when Roku finishes his training, it seems like he goes back to immediately having a good relationship with Sosen, and it's only Sosen talking about his ambitions that really begins to cause the major rift between the two of them, not necessarily that, oh, you haven't been focusing on us too much as a nation, that sort of thing. So interesting stuff, and I think just broadly, I hope for Roku that this novel accomplishes what the Kyoshi novels and the Yang Chen novels accomplished, of just creating more nuanced discussion and discourse surrounding the character in the fandom. Roku is a little bit he gets too focused in on for his decision to not kill Sosen, and a lot of people in the fandom do define him solely by that, and I think very unfairly, because I think the discussion about like, well, he should have just killed his best friend is not particularly nuanced or detailed, as is often the case in some of these things of like people assuming or applying a lot of issue to some of these issues where there's more nuance to it. I hope we come out of this just with people being able to, I think, better understand the character of Roku. I know there's always going to be discussion about that because it's such a major moment in the franchise, but understanding that that was Roku's mistake, but at the same time, Roku wasn't wrong to make that mistake, given the context at the time, especially. So that's, I think for the most part, like Roku. Obviously, we know he's going to like hang out with Gatso. It'll be interesting to see how that relationship kind of develops, and then how that affects potentially him actually going about learning airbending and stuff like that. And we also know Ta Min potentially is going to be in the book, so we might get some Roku Ta Min, but we'll discuss some of that stuff a little bit later on. Moving on to Sosen. So obviously from the descriptions we know he is going to give Roku the sort of main mission of the book. He's going to tell him about the dispute over the island and get him involved. As far as we're aware, that is him contacting Roku, not going to see him. So Sosen, and if he has a few POV chapters in the book, I get the impression they are going to be back at home in the Fire Nation, with him doing political stuff like interacting with his father, his sister, that sort of thing, and kind of monitoring things from that side of things. Maybe he stays in touch with Roku by like messages or something like that. Carrier kind of hawk or something like that. We don't really know. The big question is obviously how much Sosen are we going to get, because he is just as interesting of a character as Roku. He is ultimately the kind of main villain of like probably the Avatar franchise because of what he goes on to become. So it feels like they have to give him the good treatment. Like, is it enough for Sosen to get like the Janju treatment, where like there's maybe 3 quick chapters from his perspective? Even the Yun treatment, like, is it enough for him to only be in a handful of chapters? It kind of feels like, are they going to split the book half and half? I don't think so, but it feels like he needs to be given quite a bit of time in this book, because he's just as interesting to develop. Like this big villain, how is he different from his father? What sort of early setup stuff are we going to do with him about like how much of his ambitions are here already at this young age? How much of a problem is he right now? That sort of thing, of course. So we know for sure there's at least one Sosen POV chapter. If you listen to the audio preview, it is a Sosen point of view chapter where it seems to be set in between Roku being announced as the Avatar, but before Roku leaves. So there's a bit of they add in this kind of scene of the two kind of interacting in between. So it's a bit of a flashback chapter. I'm wondering, is it maybe the prologue, or are the Sosen chapters going to be kind of like offset and be kind of backstory related, and they'll maybe then catch up with the present day or something like that? Because you would maybe expect there to be stuff in this like, hey, how did Roku and Sosen meet? Sure, Roku's a noble, Sosen's the prince, they run in the same high society, I guess, but how did they become friends? Because they do seem to highlight in like the preview chapter that like what, for Sosen, Roku is like his only true friend, and he seems to have lost his other friends along the way. Roku doesn't seem to be the most popular or confident character, so it doesn't come across as if he has a ton of friends himself. So how did these two characters meet? That could be something that should be quite interesting to get into, to develop that. One thing we also do learn here is that apparently Sosen has disappointed his father by not being the Avatar. Because remember, Sosen and Roku have the same birthday, so they were probably born in or around the same time, meaning there was likely a chance that the Fire Lord's son became the Avatar. We don't know what the real Rava selection process is. Is it just a matter of timing, or is there a choice kind of type thing involved? Like, where is something like this not actually like possible? Like, can the Avatar like... I suppose with Korra, it's not that they'll avoid like notable family lines or anything like that. I guess it was absolutely a possibility. So was it a specific thing that the Fire Lord planned? We don't really know. But his father now is now manipulate your friendship with Roku to, get him in good with the Fire Nation, so that we have a really loyal Avatar to our cause. But Sosen is like, he doesn't want to abuse his relationship with Roku because he already is friends with him, and he notes it's his only true friendship. So he doesn't seem to obviously have the plan initially to take advantage of it. So is Sosen asking Roku about this mission him leaning in this direction of following his father's orders, or does Sosen just think that this is something he needs to tell the Avatar about? That'll be interesting. The Legends RPG, in terms of more kind of context around like what is actually the case between like his father and him, the RPG tells us that Sosen's father is more focused on like internal Fire Nation stuff. He doesn't tend to look outwards maybe as much. So Sosen getting Roku involved in the conflict over the island, is that actually something that his father orders him to do, or is it Sosen acting on his own and trying to maybe stand out and show his potential as the next kind of in line? It does feel like the obvious plot point, like I said before, is Roku realizing that maybe the Earth Kingdom has a valid reason to be involved here, and that he might have to go against Sosen's wants, the Fire Lord's wants, and how will Sosen react to that sort of stuff actually happening. Otherwise, it's kind of just about like, yeah, how much focus Sosen actually gets in relation to like, are we going to get quite a few scenes of him interacting with his sister Zaison, interacting with his father even more, really get into sort of like the high up political stuff going on in the Fire Nation, because it could be one of our first times really getting to see the royal family dynamic, like that's not the kind of Zuko family kind of tree type thing. Further back, it'll be interesting to see what they do. So, you know, a lot of, I think, big stuff on like the amount of Sosen content is actually going to be a determining factor, I think, in the book. Gyatso. So basically, I suppose our first real team avatar kind of companion here. We're obviously going to see the origin of this friendship, because obviously both descriptions allude to the idea that I guess Roku finds Gyatso annoying initially. They maybe know of each other, but based on the preview chapter, Roku, I forget, like, is it just that they haven't gone to the Air Temple yet? So it might be just him meeting him for the first time and not getting a first good impression. But they'll go on to become very close friends. So close this friendship will last lifetimes, basically. And yes, if you consider Roku to have a team avatar, Gyatso is part of that team. Interestingly, when you try and like bridge the gap between everything, obviously Gyatso goes on to become Aang's father figure and mentor. And one of the distinguishing factors of Gyatso is that he really looks out for Aang as a person, not just as like his importance as the avatar. He understands the need for Aang to have a normal life as much as possible, and to kind of keep the responsibility of the avatar or kind of away from him for as long as possible. And does he do this because he has experience from having met Roku at a very early stage of his avatar journey? And even though Roku was told at the right age, he still is aware that like that's a giant change to put on someone even at 16. And so that's why he is so understanding of Aang's position as the new avatar. That could be interesting to see. Like Gyatso is, I guess, is going to be characterized as being kind of like goofy, fun-loving, but the more serious sides of maybe what actually makes him like Roku and become friends with him might be the understanding over like the crazy responsibilities that are in play here. But otherwise, it does feel like it's very open to characterize Gyatso at this younger age in kind of whatever way they need to, because even Legends RPG, the description is quite vague about Gyatso. It's just like, he's wise, Roku goes to him for counsel quite often, in terms of the conflict in the air nomads at the time of basically like the guiding wind versus the kind of elders, and the idea of should we spread out more and help more people, or should we become more kind of insular? Gyatso remains neutral in the conflict and is open to kind of hearing a lot of different ideas. They're presenting him as being a bit of a voice of reason. And so are we going to see some of that side of Gyatso come out in terms of helping Roku, who's not going to be super confident? Gyatso might help to give him that confidence, is maybe part of how they're going to do things. But it's very open to see how they specifically approach doing the avatar and companion dynamic in this book, because we're going in now with, we know both characters, and there's a significance placed on both characters here, which is cool. Sister Daisha, Roku's airbending master, she seems from the preview chapter to be quite wise and fair, but also not afraid to sort of challenge Roku and kind of call him out a little bit. So there's a little bit of harshness there, but I don't think it's excessive based on what we saw. She knows that she needs to kind of shape him into someone who is more Avatar-like and less Fire National, who now is the Avatar type thing. From the description, we know she, I guess, is told about Sosen's request, so that becomes sort of public knowledge. It's not just a secret that they go off and do the mission on their own. Daisha knows about it and tells him not to do it, but he goes anyway. So the real question probably is, maybe outside of the first third or something like that of the book, maybe coming back in at the end, how heavily involved is Daisha actually going to be? Will she end up like joining them on the mission at a certain point, just to have someone who's maybe older with them, but she's not there maybe at the start? It's hard to really say. Definitely a character we still need to learn a little bit more about. Not sure maybe how much potential there is for like huge things to happen, but just from the preview chapter, she seems somewhat interesting, I would definitely say. Then we have, we got the name already from the audio preview, Firelord Taiso. I'm not sure about the spelling here because we only got the audio preview, but it's definitely pronounced Taiso. Now, it might be spelled with a Z, there might be a H in there somewhere, but Taiso is Sosen's father. We've been waiting for this for a while. We basically knew we were guaranteed to get it because if there's an Earth Kingdom Fire Nation conflict, of course they're going to address the leaders of the two nations. So this is Sosen's father, current Fire Lord. Clearly wanted Sosen to be the Avatar, now wants to use his son to use his friendship to get the Avatar on the side of the Fire Nation. And there's a slight sense that Sosen seems to have some frustrations with his father over stuff like that, and likely the idea that, as has been the case for a while within the Fire Nation royal family, the Fire Lords push their children to kind of compete against each other as part of this rivalry to shape them into these hyper-ambitious people, where we get the sort of like evil line of Fire Lords from, basically. Because we know that's the relationship that Sosen and Zason are meant to have, is that they are basically pitched against each other from an early stage. And that's why there's kind of conflict between them, especially as we go into the RPG era of Roku's era, which, you know, this is where Zason, it feels like, comes more into play maybe in a couple of years. But for Sosen, like, of course, she's a part of his life now. From the RPG, Sosen becoming Fire Lord, which will happen later, it says it's painless and uncontested. So unless they're going to establish that sort of like behind the scenes secretly he takes out his father, it seems like his father just dies and he becomes the next Fire Lord, and there's no real dispute over this being the case. So there's that. The Roku era is broadly, the Fire Nation is united in this era. Clan issues have not really been a thing for decades, but this whole time they have still been focused on themselves. It's definitely been the Fire Nation focusing on its own issues, even if maybe the clans are not as big of a thing. There's maybe the potential that Sosen is the one to look beyond the borders, whereas the Fire Lord really isn't. He's still focused on the nation itself. Sosen is the one who begins the focus of the Fire Nation on tech, coal-powered vessels and that sort of thing, building their fleet. That's just to highlight that potentially the plot surrounding the island isn't necessarily about like resources to build a armada or a fleet necessarily. They could still bring it into play earlier, but Sosen, it seems like historically, is the one known for bringing the Fire Nation fleet thing as the idea to the surface. There's a slight suggestion from the RPG that noble families are still like involved in the high-up of Fire Nation politics and are probably the last real kind of threat to the Fire Lord, that Sosen eventually kind of stamps out. So noble families might still have a big say in things, but don't seem to be hugely problematic ultimately. And then obviously the idea is, does Taiso care about the remote island? We know obviously the Earth King does, because he's the one who has initiated this, because where does it say it? I think it's in the new description. Earth King's aggressive expansion of territory, and the Earth King want to claim this island. So it's an Earth King mandate that they go after this island. That's the idea there. So yeah, let's go on to that Earth King. We do have his name. Again, this is from the Avatar Legends RPG. So we don't know for sure that Jailun is referenced in the novel, but the RPG basically makes it super clear this is or should be the Earth King in this book, because there is literally a reference to an event that happened right at the start of Roku's training, and he was the one who made it happen. So this is Earth King Jailun, or Jailun, who is the Earth King of the Roku era. He's described in the RPG as being petty, cruel, calculating, but underestimated by many people, because a lot of people think that the leader of the Earth Kingdom is mired in the kind of craziness of how big the nation is and everything's like bureaucracy and stuff like that. But he is actually the spider spinning the web and is orchestrating stuff. As we see here, he seems to be quite active, expanding Earth Kingdom territory. And the event that I referenced from before was the Night of Silenced Sages, where he brutally basically gets rid of the Earth Sage Order. So all the Earth Sages effectively go away. He effectively replaces them with like a not as, interesting but loyal group that kind of serves the same purpose. And it's noted that he uses the Dai Li to kind of make a lot of this happen. So there's a little bit of like the Kyoshi legacy coming out of like the reason the Earth Kings have the access to the Dai Li is because Kyoshi trained them, and this might be one of the first major times that the Dai Li are used to do something like particularly bad, of course, as we go forward, but interesting still. Apparently, again from the RPG, he leads the Earth Kingdom to be very isolationist, which is interesting that he's now expanding outwards, but it's noted that he also tries to make a point that hey, we should be kind of xenophobic to the other nations. He's all about trying to keep his power in whatever way possible, and so distracting everyone from himself is the best way to do that. So basically stoke the fear against outside threats, so you don't see the threat that actually is your leader being a menace himself. So obviously the idea of his description here seems like, okay, like what's he doing here? Why his expansion maybe goes against some of the other stuff that he's doing? What's he actually trying to accomplish here is quite interesting, because typically a lot of the Earth Kings are, characterized by being somewhat passive, not really able to make anything super notable happen because they lead such a giant nation. They effectively have little control over the outskirts of it, and only have like a sort of centralized power. So this guy maybe has a little bit more control. And again, the question comes up, why is he expanding? And specifically, why does he want this remote island? Apparently, historically, I guess, it's a fire island, but he seems to think it's his. Now, is he just trying to take it over, or does he actually have a reason for why he's claiming it to be a Earth Kingdom territory? We don't know. Other characters that may or may not be involved, I'll mention when they're confirmed. Zaison is referenced in the audio preview, so we know she's somewhere in the book here. Is she going to actually be in focus? We don't know. Again, this depends on if Sosen gets a lot of focus chapters, and if they delve into the family dynamic as being a thing. It might be a few years too early for Zaison really kind of going up against Sosen like it is in the RPG, but it would be nice if they did a little bit of setup work on that side of things. So I would be looking forward to seeing some interesting Zaison stuff, but I'm not sure how super confident I am that we're going to get it. Either way, the reference of the previously RPG only character in the book is very nice to see. So yeah, the rivalry between the two is probably going to get brought up. You also wonder if she does get some focus here. Is this where we might see her interest in the air nomads come up, and she might end this book asking, can I go and like train under the air nomads? And that might be where the whole air nomad Fire Nation connection, that's a big part of the Roku era in the RPG, kind of comes from. And that will be a super interesting thing, especially like if Sosen's actually going to interact with Roku, if Zaison's going to interact with Roku, her finding out that Roku's just gone to an air temple could be something interesting. Because that's another thing we want to know. I don't think there's much reference in the RPG to if like Zason and Roku really know each other. So that could be interesting. Ta Min, based on the back cover of the book, is in the book here somewhere, even though we maybe weren't expecting it. Apparently Roku feels like he has to save her, so obviously something has happened to her, and he feels like as part of the mission he has to save her, because it seems like he gets himself caught by like earthbenders. Gyatso is the one to get him out, and before Gyatso gets him out, he's like, I need to go into the Avatar state to get out, I have to save Ta Min. Oh no, I can't use the Avatar state, or I can't use any other bending to get out. Oh, my friend who is annoying has saved me, is sort of the idea. But again, why is Ta Min involved? Like, why does she, who informs him that she's in danger? Is this part of the mission setup? Is that like, there's a dispute over this island, and one of the reasons we wanted you to get involved is that, this family maybe has been captured by the Earth Kingdom, and they were the ones kind of, leading that island or something like that. And then maybe Roku makes the connection of like, wait, that's Ta Min's family. Is Ta Min okay? And Sosen is like, actually, no, she was captured as well. That's the only real connection I can think of right now, is that in this dispute over the island, is Ta Min's family the one leading the dispute on the Fire Nation side of things? That's a potential thing. Again, how much of a focus is this going to be? I guess they'll get scenes together, because I'm assuming they want to build up to this kind of relationship dynamic a little bit. But, we will see what happens here. So this is very much a thing where, like, all we know is that the name is referenced and there's some minor context surrounding why she might be in the book, but we don't really know why. And then this is just from the RPG, some information about world leaders. Guo Zun is the queen of Omashu during this time, and the main notable thing here is just that she particularly hates Earth King Jailun. As I think most of the world leaders do, they are very suspicious of him, and the Queen of Omashu in particular doesn't like him. So that's an interesting one. I'm guessing this is effectively our, queen just before kind of Boomy, but there might be one in between, but we have to see. But either way, this is from obviously like 12 years after this book, but they say she's elderly, so she should still be the queen, just a little bit younger in this book when we start off. Skiri is the Northern Water Tribe chief of the era. Quanit is the Northern Water Tribe chieftain of the era. And that's an interesting point. And again, the Roku era, all of the nations are mostly characterized as being somewhat suspicious of the other nations. There's a little bit of a Cold War style thing going on where there's very little giant scale conflict happening, but there is little disputes over stuff like islands and passages of land, fishing routes and stuff like that, trade routes. That's what we're dealing with in the Roku era. So you have a lot of people suspicious of the Earth Kingdom making moves, including fellow Earth Kingdom leaders. You have like the water tribes trying to do their thing and get power themselves. I believe there is I think the water tribes are relatively unified in this era. I might have to read that again, but I'd be surprised if we delved too heavily into water tribe conflict in this book. I'd be surprised if anything except maybe a mention of Skiri kind of really comes up when it comes to water tribe stuff, but we'll see what happens. Other characters that we might see in relation to the air nomads, because we're going to be at the Southern Air Temple for a little bit. Khandro is the guy who will become the future head of the Guiding Wind. He'll be engaged to marry Zason ahead of this big wedding where we assume some crazy stuff is about to happen. Who knows where we'll get that story from. But Khandro is a pretty important character. So we might see a younger Khandro at the Southern Air Temple alongside Gyatso. Maybe it'd be a cool little reference to have, especially if they do start to set up the stage for the Zason plot. Udron is one of the Air Nomad elders of the era. He's the one named character that we really get. So we might see him show up. I don't think they clarify if he's at the Southern or Northern Temple, but I'm guessing he might be the Southern leader. That I think probably makes the most sense. So he could clearly get referenced that like Roku's maybe met him or something like that. Ryoshan, again, in relation to the Zaison stuff, this is the character who will go on to, in the future, have a relationship with Zaison, but this is more of a Western Air Temple thing, so maybe she'll be referenced or get brought up. It's kind of unclear. A lot depends on, you know, what the setup is for the plot, maybe of book 2, or like how wide we're actually going to go, how much they're going to keep as being like this is the RPG's story versus not. We don't really know. And then getting into the plot, the mysterious island itself we probably need to talk about. Again, it's very difficult to speculate on because it's literally just mysterious unknown island with a secret. So yeah, remote fire island in dispute between the Earth Kingdom and the Fire Nation. But apparently it's mostly acknowledged as being a fire island. So the Earth Kingdom is going to come across as being the aggressors in this, which fits with the general theming of the Earth King, of course. The island, based on the description, has a secret that could be catastrophic in the wrong hands. So, okay. So, someone who controls this island and discovers the secret of it could do something bad with whatever it is. Very, very difficult to speculate on. One thing with the island in terms of its identity is obviously like, do we know the island? Is it going to be a named island when we get the name of it? Or is it going to be brand new? The RPG makes reference to Natsuo Island, as well as I think it was referenced in the last novel, if I remember correctly. And it's referenced as there being a similar conflict between the Earth Kingdom and the Fire Nation about like ownership over it. But again, the RPG is set like 12 years after this book, and it's described that like, oh yeah, they're fighting over this island because it's unclaimed by either side, whereas this island seems to be, it's a fire island and the Earth Kingdom is trying to claim it, whereas this one is more actually in dispute. So I think it's really clear that they're different, but they might maybe retcon it to be this. We don't really know. The question then comes up, like, what is the secret? Because like, if it's not Natsuo Island, is there maybe a chance it's like Roku's island that goes on to become his home? Maybe. That would be a kind of cool thematic thing. But what's the secret of Roku's island? As far as we were aware, like, is there a secret to it really? Who knows? So yeah, what is the secret? There's obviously a chance it could be combustion bending again. It was a big political thing of like world leaders would want to use this incredible power to their advantage. There's a chance it's lava bending, potentially. Maybe they get into the truth of like what is the actual way to properly awaken lava bending. They could do that if they want to lean into that some more, using a little bit of the information from the last Yang Chen book, but that's pure speculation. A spirit that can be used, I get the impression spirit-related stuff is not going to be a huge focus for the Roku era, but it's always a possibility. And if it is something particularly notable, a spirit could cause kind of crazy stuff to happen. That could, especially if it's a big mystery, spirit stuff is the way to introduce wild new elements if they want to. Is it just a natural resource on the island that can be used to make like a weapon, a poison, a toxin, something like that? Because they're obviously highlighting that if you have control over this, you are now dangerous. Something catastrophic could happen. So what is that? And it's like, yeah, if you gain control over the secret poison, that's one thing. Ancient, you know, this is the potential, a political thing of like, hey, ancient texts that reveal history about the way things were in the past or something like that. That, hey, all of this land actually is meant to belong to this nation, but it's just been ignored. You know, that could be something that they could fight over. That's sort of an interesting kind of style thing to do. But otherwise, it's like, I'd be super interested to see if anyone actually calls what the answer to this actually is. Because I think the first Yang Chen book did a very good job at kind of hiding and keeping a mystery until the right time what Project Unanimity was. And it was kind of unexpected. I don't remember anyone calling it really prior to really knowing many chapters into the book. We have to see, obviously. I do think there's a bit of pressure on a topic like this because I would say Legacy of Yang Chen maybe didn't use the combustion bending reveals as well as it could have in terms of properly going in depth. And I would like it when we get the mystery reveal for it to have some substance to it at the end and not just be a, oh, it's this, moving on type thing. Actually make the mystery a really big and important part of the book, given that it is the main plot. Because I think the worst thing that could happen is we spend a ton of time on the secret. It's maybe not the most interesting thing, and we're all asking at the end of the book, why couldn't like half of the book be about Sosen? We didn't need this much focus on this random plot when there was so much else, other stuff you could have done. Because that's probably the one maybe fear potentially with this book, is that I think us as fans, the things we want to maybe be explored given the topics at play here are maybe a little bit different than what the actual plot of this book actually is. Of just like, okay, Roku and Gyatso together investigating the island, it does all depend and hinge upon what the situation really is. Yes, there's the political stuff behind the scenes about like, okay, the world leaders and what's going on, what Sosen is doing at the Fire Nation compared to his father, and how Roku's actions will impact his I suppose, how he is seen by the rest of the world, how the Earth King sees him, how the Fire Lord sees him, how Sosen sees him. That will all come into play kind of coming out of this. But, you know, that's the big thing. Like, we want probably Roku backstory. We want the ability to skip ahead rather than maybe linger on this time period for a really long amount of time, which is why I feel if there is a book where the second book does do something quite different, it probably needs to be this one, because I would like to see the capacity for this to skip on to, and now here's the book where like Takukak jumps into the focus and we can have him meeting him for the first time and getting that whole dynamic as the second thing. Because otherwise, like, you are limited a little bit. Like, we are not going to be able to see Roku's full team avatar in this book because he's not going to meet Takukak for another like 4 years. He's not going to meet Sud for like another 4 years after that. And so you need to be a little bit like more stretched out if you want to cover all that material with Roku. So gonna wrap it up there. I am excited for the book. Like, I think like the novel, it's going to be the most significant piece of content we get this year for the kind of animation continuity, because it looks like we have this, we have Bounty Hunter and the T-Brewer, which I think will be a good comic, but I don't think it's going to have the scope or the depth that we maybe want, and I think a novel just is going to offer a little bit more. And then the RPG material, I think, is going to really just depend on the bios for the characters. I'm not sure what the adventures are going to be in terms of detail, but the adventures are rarely like the most fascinating things. So this novel is the most important thing for the year in terms of canon content. I think it's so far been 4 out of 4 for good Avatar novels, and I think this is shaping up to be quite good also. I think it just needs to really do a decent job about like making it clear that like it's telling a more unique story, because I think, you know, we're getting into a situation with the novels where I think a lot of us would like to see the ability to it be an avatar when they're older, rather than it always having to be like 16-year-old avatar, 17-year-old avatar. That might get a little bit frustrating if that's just the, you know, flow of things. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, if you introduced a completely brand new avatar and it's 16-year-old that avatar and it's in a completely new time period, I'm completely up for that. So excited for the novel. I am going to do my usual coverage on it, so expect a non-spoiler review, a spoiler review, and then the chapter analysis videos will begin. And then along the way, there'll be podcast reviews, probably broken down into 3 or 4 like usual. And so yeah, a lot of coverage on the book. And then of course there'll be slight breaks in the coverage, I'm guessing, because it'll only be a few weeks before we have the Bounty Hunter, the T-Brewer coming out. In the meantime, I'm guessing the RPG book is also going to drop during all of that. Plus, we have San Diego Comic-Con happening at the end of the month also, and I'm going to have to do probably some coverage on that, depending on how much news there is. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the Reckoning of Roku, and what are your big speculation points? What do you expect from this book? What do you think of some of the speculation points I brought up with, and especially with stuff like the really open mystery? What island, what is the island, and then what is the secret of the island, and will it be good and worth the wait for the big mystery? Let me know all your thoughts on the book below, but otherwise that's been my thoughts, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.